What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. So you see the car, it's nice and high, and it's basically sitting on four stands that I built so that I could have the car nice and high and nice and level and on all four wheels for safety. And so the topic of today's video is going to be fuel. How did I get the LS3 engine fed with fuel from the back of the car all the way to the front of the car? Now normally, when it comes to the fuel lines, most people, they just change out the fuel lines. They'll get some stainless steel lines, or they'll get PTFE lines, and they'll route it from the back of the car all the way to the front of the car. And so when I was planning out how I was going to build and put together the car so that I could have the LS3 engine, and of course how I was going to bring the fuel to the engine, I didn't want to spend on all new parts when the car already has fuel lines in there. Now before I decided to go LS3 and I had the 454, I had bought all new steel fuel lines, 3/8 inch steel lines. And I just did that because I wanted to get some new lines. And so since I had already bought new lines, they were practically brand new, they was only a couple of months old, I didn't feel it was necessary for me to toss those in favor of getting some new lines. I wanted to use the same lines. And so using the steel lines for me provided a sense of security against nicks and things, because the car already came with steel fuel lines, and in my opinion it's just safer to have steel fuel lines. So I wanted to use electric pump, that's for sure. I wanted to get a new fuel tank that had a baffle in it. That is definitely for sure, because the stock fuel tank did not have a baffle in it. So when you do a corner, when you turn a corner or something, and it has happened with the carburetor setup, I would get fuel starvation if the fuel would move away from the pickup. So I wanted a fuel tank with a baffle in it. And so we're gonna go under the car and we're gonna see all these things. But the main thing that I want to talk about today is how I got the fuel lines to be used, as far as attaching them to the fuel tank and getting it all the way to the front and attaching the steel fuel line to my LS3 engine. So we're gonna do two things. We're gonna go to the to my counter. We're gonna look at the parts that I use, and then we're gonna go under the car and I'm gonna actually show you what I did so that you get an idea how I brought the fuel to the LS3 engine. So let's go ahead and check that out right now. So here we are, and we got a couple parts that I'm going to talk about briefly, which helped in making my fuel setup reach my LS3 from the fuel tank. Now, wherever I used flexible fuel line, I opted for steel braided PTFE lined fuel line. Now I cut back some of the braiding so that you can see the actual PTFE lining. Now, the other main thing in the car as far as fuel line is the steel fuel line. And you can see here the size of the 6AN stainless steel fuel line that I was using, and my steel fuel line that comes with the car, which of course I purchased new as a replacement for my Nova. So these are the two main lines. And as far as PTFE, I would definitely recommend using PTFE over rubber, because PTFE is resistant to everything, and with today's ethanol fuels, ethanol tends to dry out things and cause issues. So getting a PTFE lined fuel line would ensure that your fuel system, as far as these go, will last the life of the car. So that's what I wanted. I wanted something that would last. I didn't want to be dealing with rubber in the future cracked, dried, or whatever. I didn't want to go and mess with it. I just wanted to put in a fuel line and be done with it. So that's what I use, PTFE. And so they're both 3/8 inch or 6 AN. So the one in the Nova is 3/8 inch fuel line, and anything that was PTFE was 6 AN. Now, when you're getting the fittings, I shouldn't have to talk about this, and I'm gonna be really brief, but make sure you get PTFE type fittings to go with your PTFE lines. So that's basically what I want to talk about as far as this, and that's why this is here. This is basically it's 2 parts, and it has a cap, and then it has a ferrule in there. In this case, it's a steel ferrule, and you put together the line. Once it's put together, you're not gonna get any leaks. It's gonna be on there really tight. And here's another one here, that a used one, just so that you can see how it ends up locking. So that ferrule gets smashed down onto the liner, and it pretty much creates a very, very solid seal. So that's just an example of how it looks. If you've never seen it without the stainless steel, that's what it looks like. So you see, and it's on there good. It's not coming out. Once you do this, that's it. It's not coming out. So that's what I use. These two as far as fuel line. Now, how did I get my steel fuel lines to accept 6 AN fittings? Well, that's where this comes in. This is a swage lock fitting, and what makes it special is first, this thing is made 100% completely of stainless steel. And the best part about this is that it has 2 ferrules. It has the regular one, okay, and then it has a secondary one. And so if I'm gonna put a photo of the part so that you can see with part number right about now. So that's the part. And so basically I'm gonna show really briefly how this works. So you have this here, okay, this goes on there, and then we have the second ferrule, the back ferrule, which is a smaller one, and then we have the front ferrule, which is the larger one, and then we have the actual fitting. And so when you crank this sucker down, okay, this first ferrule will lock onto the pipe, and this second ferrule will also lock onto the pipe, creating a double seal. And so what I really liked about this is that, first of all, it's stainless steel, so it's gonna last a lifetime. So longevity is a major thing for me, because I don't want to be messing with this anymore. And the other thing is that it causes such a leak-free seal that nothing is going to break it. And I did a lot of research on swage lock, and so you can do that too. You can type in swage lock and look at all the tests that they performed on their fittings, and you'll see this thing is indestructible. And we're only running 58 to 60 psi of fuel pressure, so this thing can withstand thousands of pressure, thousands of psi of pressure. So we're gonna know that this is gonna lock on, and I'm not gonna have any vapor leaks, I'm not gonna have any fuel leaks, nothing. And that's why I use this. So this fitting, once it's on there, once it's locked on there, it now converts my steel fuel line into an AN line, so I can put my fuel fittings. Now, the last thing I want to cover is this tool. Now, this is not necessary, but I did get it because it just made my life easier. So it has 3 sizes, and the one in red is the one that I'm using, which is 3/8 inch line. So if you can fit this on there in the gap, then you don't have it tight enough. That's how this tool works. You basically crank this down, with 2 wrenches. You keep cranking it down until you can no longer fit this in there. And you can see it's quite loose as it is. So when I crank this down and this can no longer fit, I'm done. It's tight, it's never gonna come apart or whatever. And so that's pretty much the secret to my setup. This swage lock fitting. And I bought a bunch of these, and I didn't only do it on my fuel line, but I also did it on my transmission lines as well, because I wanted to convert my transmission steel lines into AN lines wherever I wanted to use a flexible line. So now we're gonna go under the car. I'm gonna show you how it's all set up, but that's pretty much the basis of it. Now, there is a procedure as far as tightening it. If you didn't have this tool, basically, I believe is you put a little dot on there, you know, 2 dots on both parts, and then you make one full turn, and then you do another, what is it, like they say 6 o'clock, and then you make one full turn and bring it back to 6 o'clock, so both dots will line up, and then you turn it just a little bit more to the 9 o'clock position where the dot would move, and that would be tight. So me, I didn't want to deal with that. I didn't want to be dealing with counting turns or anything. I just wanted something that I could just, you know, on the fly look and see that it's tight, and this tool provided that, because if it don't fit, then it's tight enough. So that's pretty much it. So let's go under the car and show you what I got going on under the car, and show you how it's attached, you know, from the fuel tank all the way to my LS3 engine. Okay, so we're under the car, and right now on your screen you'll see me focusing on where the fuel pump and fuel sender is on top of the fuel tank. So we'll start from there, and then the lines, they go over, and then let's go here. So they go here, and as you can see from here, we have the GM composition sensor, the ethanol fuel sensor, and this is optional. The reason why I installed that in my return line was because I wanted to make sure that I had the option of using E85 sometime in the future. Though I'm not using E85 now, having this sensor in line with the return line enables me to, you know, pretty much tune my car for E85 in the future if I ever wanted to go that route. So I didn't want to be limited, so I decided to go ahead and wire in this sensor at the same time of me putting together this system. So that's why that's there. So anyway, we got here, and then after the sensor, the composition sensor, it goes to the fuel filter. And so this is one of the Corvette filters where it's a filter and a fuel pressure regulator all in one. So this filter does regulate the fuel pressure at 58 psi, and then the excess fuel that's not going to the engine gets rerouted right back to the tank. So you'll see there's this line, which is the composition sensor line, which is also the return line, and then we have the fuel feed line from the fuel pump going into the filter. So basically, see if I can get over here. So basically we have here the top line goes into the filter, and it gets regulated to 58 psi, and then anything that the filter regulates that's over, you know, that basically is not needed, will get returned back straight to the tank. So it's pretty much a short run right back. So we got the feed, and then we got the return. And of course the other side, we have here the feed line, which is covered with a fire shield. And the reason why I have this on there, so you can see my steel braided line, and I have this here because when I was building this car, I had the exhaust system right close to the fuel line. So I put this fire shield so that I can protect the line from heat. But ultimately, as the car went through its build and I had to make changes to the exhaust system, I no longer have a danger of heating up my fuel line. But I left this in place anyway because, well, I didn't want to disconnect my fuel line just to take off the fire sleeve. So the fire sleeve stays. So we got here the original 3/8 inch factory line, and there you go. There's my swage lock fitting right there, and that's what enables me to put my stainless steel PTFE line directly connected to my fuel line right there. So this is basically the factory fuel line. What I did was I cut it up, I cut it shorter because originally it was right straight to the tank. But I cut it and made a bend here and then a slight bend here, just so that I can position my fitting, the AN fitting that's attached to the fuel line, where I wanted it in relation to the fuel filter, which, as you can see, the fuel filter is attached to the body of the car. And of course, it's very important that you ground the fuel filter because of static electricity that sometimes form as the fuel is flowing through these metal lines. So this filter is grounded, and I made sure by checking for continuity between the body and the filter itself. So that's very important. You definitely want to make sure that your filter is grounded when you attach it to the car. So we have here the fuel line, and it pretty much goes down the same way the factory intended. So we got, let's see if we can go there. So you can see there, just the way the factory intended it. And that's the beauty of using the stock fuel line. I didn't have to worry about rerouting or getting new clips or anything. So my fuel line continues. So back there, that's where it was, in the back there. So you can see it runs along the frame, and then it comes over and it goes under the car, under the rocker panel. And then on these factory fuel lines, it's a two-piece system. So what I did was I attached the fitting on there, and so then I was able to attach a short piece of hose to join both of these factory fuel lines. So that's why you see there. And in this case, we have a black lined fuel line here. So it's pretty easy to disconnect if I ever wanted to, because it's just a short piece of hose. And then we got the front fuel line, which goes along the subframe. So it goes along the subframe, and then it goes up towards the engine area there. So right here, the fuel line actually goes over here, over the subframe, and then it goes along the inside of the subframe wall. And so what I did was I rerouted the line. I put a bend so it can go up and over on top of the subframe. And I'll show you once I get to the engine side of the engine bay view. Okay, so here's the engine bay view, and you can see how I basically routed it so that it sits on top of the subframe. And then I just added this clip here, and then I made a bend, so now it suspends over the subframe. And you can see right here, I did a slight bend upward, and I put my swage lock fitting on there. And then I have my fuel line, which is a short piece of PTFE line. Let's see if I can put the light here. And so it goes from the factory fuel line, which has been remodified or modified to, you know, to these bends, and it goes over to the fuel rail on my LS3 engine. Now the fuel rail normally is facing that way on that side of the engine. Let me go there here. So it's normally facing that side of the engine, but what I did was I took the fuel rail off because obviously I had to take apart this whole engine, and I flipped the fuel rail around, and that's how I got the fuel rail inlet to be on the passenger side, which made my installation a whole lot easier as far as putting in that fuel line. So that's an easy little trick. It's not really a trick, but you know, that's what I did to get my fuel line to be routed on the passenger side, and that's pretty much it. So there you have it. I used the factory fuel line, which was stock for this Nova, and I adapted it to my LS3 6 LED combo swap. So that's basically how I got the fuel from the tank all the way to the front of the car using stock parts. Now, a couple of things I want to touch on. The first thing is the vent system. Basically the fuel tank vent. I didn't go into that, but just briefly I'm going to touch up on it. My car, the Nova, had the fuel line on the passenger side and had the vent line on the driver's side. And so I still have the vent line. It's a 5/16 inch line, and it's basically just a vapor line. And since it's already in the car, I decided to tap the fuel tank vent to that line, and then that line goes all the way to the front of the car and gets connected to a vapor canister, which is still in use in this car. I didn't get rid of it. And from the vapor canister, it gets attached to the intake pipe, and so whenever I turn on the car, any fumes that the vapor canister collected will get sucked up into the engine bay just as it's supposed to, and I don't have to worry about, you know, the garage smelling like gas because the gas tank is venting into the atmosphere. And the second thing, the swage lock fittings. Now, with the swage lock fittings, I know that there's other fittings similar on the market. The problem with those fittings is that it's usually made out of brass or copper. And from my research on those type of fittings, which are like compression fittings, those tend to leak. And because I don't want any leaks in my car, I mean, we're running 58, 60 PSI of fuel. And so, you know, having a fuel leak or a vapor leak of any kind is not a good idea. So I wanted something that was guaranteed to give me a leak seal performance and vibration resistance. And those other fittings that you see online that are much cheaper, they don't provide 100% leak-free seal. I have read posts online where there are some people that actually use that, and they were cranking down on those nuts, and no matter how tight they went to put it, they always seem to have a leak, whether it be a vapor leak or a little bit of seepage of fuel. That's not a good idea. You don't want any fuel leaking anywhere, especially in the engine bay or under the car, whatever. That's a fire hazard. You don't want that. And so with the swage lock, it being made out of stainless steel and having a dual ferrule system that really locks on, and of course with all the research I did, finding that they did extensive testing on their product to ensure that there's a complete leak-free seal, as well as tremendous vibration resistance. It was a no-brainer to be for me to use the swage lock fittings. So that's pretty much the gist of how I got my fuel system set up using factory parts. I didn't want to get new lines. I didn't want to deal with rubber lines or anything like that. I didn't want to, you know, route a big, long 15-foot line from the back of the car all the way to the front of the car when the car already had a fuel line already in place. And of course, as you saw, I may go, you know, down the line in the future, if I want more power, I may go with E85. And so my system is fully capable of handling E85 fuel, because I could just, you know, tune it into the GM computer. So there you have it. That's how I got the car situated with the fuel. The fuel system is in. I can get fuel now running to my engine, and that's just another part that I had to accomplish to be able to get my LS3 6L80E combination into my Nova, to give it that second rebirth. So as always, hit the like button if you like this video, subscribe, don't forget to hit that notification bell. You can hit me up on Instagram if you want to, you know, chat with me, you know, ask questions or whatever. And, you know, as always, hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching.